Good evening, Professor. My name is Kyle John. I am a junior at Pennsylvania High Valley. Looking to graduate within this next year coming up, or the year after that. I spent a year and a half at Northampton, and I took a semester off, and then now I'm at Pennsylvania High Valley. For the homework, we're gonna start with the podcast. For number one, to answer number one question, so our system is mainly capitalism and how I feel is a good idea for good and bad sides. It helps me because there are jobs out there. We also get access to new tech and stuff pretty easily. But the downside of things like rent, healthcare, school are getting way too expensive in today's world. In the podcast, they say capitalism pushes innovation, which I agree with, but it can leave out of fairness. I think we need a stronger safety net, a cheaper healthcare or housing system, so people don't fall behind even if they're working hard. For question two, I say capitalism is basically a system where people and companies own stuff privately and be able to compete to make money. It's good for creating choices and pushing new ideas, but I also don't like I always don't like make things fair. I also feel closer to Christine and Vivek because they talk about how capitalism creates inequality and always leave people behind. Brian made some good points about freedom and efficiency, but I just see the problems with cost and fairness more in real life. Let me see. For question three, I think some ways are way better off than Lewis because I've got modern stuff like medicine, technology, and basic comforts he never had. But I also feel like there's kind of unfair comparison. He's still super rich and powerful, and regular people back then definitely weren't living like him. Brian points show how capitalism shows us access and more things today, but it doesn't mean everything actually benefits equally. The nurse from New Orleans made capitalism so people can feel burnt out and unsupported, especially in jobs that should be more valued. I've seen in my own life my family struggling to afford healthcare and bills, and even while they're working hard just so they can afford those. The idea of loved ones that feel like a burden to them under capitalism is tough, but the truth is money gets tied into relationships and things just get harder all around. And finally, for question four, nepotism and capitalism shapes my life in both ways. It gives me chances to work, buy stuff, access to technology, but also makes things for school like housing, healthcare, and really things that are also really expensive. For low and moderate income people, it can be harder in developed countries. People might work two jobs and they still may be able to struggle and to cover rent, medical bills, all different type of stuff like that. In developing countries, workers may get jobs through global companies, but they get super low wages. Like one example, sweatshop companies in wealthy countries benefit from cheap labor overseas, but workers like that don't like the same opportunities. I think it's definitely necessary to reform capitalism so it works for more people. Things like fair wages, universal health care, and stronger protection for workers that could help each other. Without change, I feel like the system mostly helps the rich and leaves everyone else stressed out and everyone else is just trying to get by. For the Santos 2006 PDF paper, question number 5. Santos says globalization is something more like language, product, or culture spreads across borders and becomes dominant. He points out that nothing starts out global, also comes from local place that gains power. Globalization always creates winners and losers, but the local always seems to get pushed down. He uses globalization in the plural because it's not just one process. There are many, and they can't even contradict each other. Some are hegemonic, as in how do I put this? Capitalism pushed the big states and corporations, while like resistance movements and global things, they just like to always counter each other. For number 6, the Washington Conscious and the Nebo, I don't know how to say this word, sorry. The Neoliteral Conscious came out in the 1980s when the big powers like the G7 agreed on how economies should run. It pushed ideas like free trade, weak government, cutting socials, even protecting private communities and private properties. For the global north, like core countries, it worked in a favor they got to spread their product and culture and policies worldwide. For the global south, it's often meant their economies had to adjust, like switching from local farms and corps, cheap labor, debt payments, and weaker social protection. And so basically, the North written rules, the South feels harder impacts off those rules as a whole. And number 7, Santos says globalization isn't linear, it's homogazing and irreversible because it's not one of the smooth process. It's the full conflict, winners and losers, and it can change directions. It doesn't spread the way everywhere. It doesn't spread the same way everywhere. He also talks about the idea that we're all connected in the global economy. There's no longer real difference between rich and poor communities. There's always a difference between each other. In reality, the inequalities between North and South actually have grown, but this falsely hides the fact that this mindset makes people in developed countries think poverty or struggle in global South isn't a big deal and it doesn't exist anymore. And to me, that can lead to less respect, less empathy, less effort, less support, and less understanding of people in developing countries. And finally, for number 8, I define globalization as many different ways to local things like products, cultures, or ideas spread across borders, sometimes helping some groups and hurting others. It just doesn't sit right with me. And it's just not one big process, but a bunch of competing ones, and with winners and losers. And from the last part of the question, I benefit from it because I get access to things like technology, clothes, music, food, all over the world. But at the same time, I know all those benefits often come from unfair labor and environmental harm in other places. That's pretty much it, what I have from this homework from this week. If you have any questions, I will gladly answer them for you, and hope you have a good weekend.